Imagine that within a few weeks, the country you live in changes completely. People take to the streets and demand an end to the dictatorship, freedom, and that the government steps down. People everywhere are discussing what's next. The old government, suddenly powerless, resigns. The whole country is gripped by a sense of excitement, worry, but above all hope for a better future. This is exactly what happened in the GDR in autumn 1989. How did it come to this? Let's take a look behind the scenes.
Neither ox nor donkey can stop the progress of socialism.
I love everyone, all people.
We are the people.
At the beginning of the 1980s, the GDR appeared to be a stable country within the Eastern Bloc. The popular uprising in 1953 and the building of the wall in 1961 were a long time ago. Most people had resigned themselves to life under the dictatorship. They seek and find happiness in their private lives. But appearances are deceptive. Beneath the surface, troubles were brewing. The country's economic situation was catastrophic. Infrastructure and businesses were crumbling, and productivity continued to fall. Creating ruins without weapons, people mocked behind closed doors. The only salvation, loans from the West that helped the GDR economy just about stay afloat.
The plaster was coming off the walls. Flats in old buildings were in a state of collapse and freezing. Few new flats were available, and there were huge waiting lists. We saw it every day. And then, when the Leipzig trade fair opened and some or other official representative came, they gave the facade a fresh coat of paint and then left it to collapse again. It was all a lie. Of course we saw that.
In addition to the economic difficulties, there were also political problems. The GDR's surveillance system was extensive and pervasive, spying on and suppressing citizens in almost all walks of life. This system was run by the Ministry for State Security, or Stasi for short, which described itself as the shield and sword of the SED. Few people dared speak their mind openly. Nevertheless, there was resistance to the SED regime. Opposition groups developed in the semi-secluded environment of the churches. They campaigned for peace and disarmament and for solutions to environmental problems.
We were strong on the inside, but not on the outside. We had no power at all, only really the power of the word, from Luther, so to speak. And we were a space where people could speak freely. As it turned out, many of the later uprisings began in these places, around the churches.
And it's not just in the GDR that resistance was brewing. In Poland, where there was resistance to communist rule from the very beginning, the Solidarność trade union movement showed that resistance was possible in the early 1980s. Even in Russia, with the accession to power of Mikhail Gorbachev in the mid-1980s and his politics of glasnost and perestroika, reforms began to be put into effect from on top. The 7th of May 1989 marked the beginning of the end of the GDR. To allay dissatisfaction in the population, the SED leadership allowed independent citizens to observe the counting of votes in the local elections for the first time. What everyone had long suspected came to light. The supposedly free elections in the GDR were completely rigged. From then on, many people no longer saw a future in this country. Hundreds of thousands filed requests to leave the country. Others risked their lives and dared to escape to the West. In the summer of 1989, the border between Austria and Hungary opened. Numerous East Germans took advantage of this opportunity and fled to the West. In Prague, desperate GDR citizens occupied the embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany and, after long negotiations, were allowed to leave for the West.
Your departure.
And the GDR leadership carried on as before. Oblivious to the changing world outside, East Berlin indulged in pompous parades, ignoring the mass exodus as well as the political and economic decline of the state. But the illusion of the GDR regime was rapidly disintegrating. Opposition began to form and gain ever more support. In September 1989, the new Forum formed, and other citizen-led organizations such as Democracy Now! And Democratic Awakening soon followed. The founding of the Social Democratic Party, SDP for short, marked the first opposition party in the GDR. From the beginning of September, more and more people began to protest in public. On the 7th of October, tens of thousands took to the streets in Plauen, and on the 9th of October in Leipzig, demanding free elections and an end to the SED regime.
Then came the 9th of October, Leipzig. We could already see the military vehicles amassing on the motorway, and then I was called back. They said, "You have to be here now, in Klingenthal. It's starting here." Around 100 people had gathered in the new housing estate with candles and began to march peacefully and quietly through the town.
"We were prepared for the worst, but not candles and prayers," said Horst Sindermann,
president of the GDR People's Chamber.
The state leadership had few means at its disposal to counter the mass protests. After half-hearted offers of dialogue with the opposition, internal disputes and recriminations, the entire state government resigned at the beginning of November 1989.
Permanent departures are now possible through any of the GDR border crossing points to West Germany. As far as I know, effective immediately, without delay.
News of the border opening spread like wildfire. 100,000 East Berliners flocked to the border checkpoints along the Berlin Wall that same night and demanded, "Open the gates." 28 years after the wall was built, it opened that night.
It was something you thought would never change. That was how it was. But then the wall did come down. And then also this smaller border crossing. Those are some of the most wonderful experiences in life, when something falls that was so cemented in people's minds. And now people can just meet each other. That's really, really beautiful.
So, what were the next steps for the GDR? On the 7th of December, representatives of all parties and opposition movements met for the first time in Berlin for the so-called Central Round Table. They discussed the big questions for the country's future: an end to the SED, the regime, and the dissolution and investigation of the Stasi. A new constitution was to be drawn up and free elections prepared. In addition, advisory and supervision mechanisms for the existing transitional government were agreed. On the 18th of March 1990, the only free elections to be held in the GDR took place. The unjust regime of the SED was over. Today, the term Wende refers to the peaceful revolution of 1989 in the former GDR. Back then, a regime was overthrown that deprived people of basic rights, locked up hundreds of thousands of people in camps and prisons, prevented free elections, spied on its citizens, and brutally suppressed freedom of expression. These are rights that we take for granted today, and yet must also stand up for again and again.